in Ruth, right? This amazing story that we kicked off, beautiful, that we kicked off a couple weeks ago. We're in week 3 with only 3 to go after this, right? Really quick story, but amazing story. And so we've met a couple of our characters so far, right? 2 of the 3. We've met Naomi and Ruth, and we know their situation is a difficult situation, right? Naomi's lost her husband and 2 sons, and Ruth is her daughter-in-law, and she's lost her husband. And Ruth, we saw last week, make this most audacious commitment to Naomi to leave her family behind in Moab and stick herself, right, to like glue, essentially, like adhesive to Naomi, and head back to Naomi's land. But yet when they got there, right, no one jumped in and said, hey, come live with us. Hey, we've got you. As far as we know, as all the narrator told us, is Naomi and Ruth are still alone after arriving in Bethlehem, though we know they created a stir, right, which we said is chaos and confusion. People are trying to figure out what's happening. Why is she back all alone with this foreigner, essentially, right? Why did she bring her back with her? And that's where we're going to pick up our story this morning. But we want to start with this quote again. I just love this quote to get us thinking about this story, which is the Scroll of Ruth is a book about kindness and audacity, right? And audacity, again, is fearlessness, daring, it's bold, it's original. And it's about kindness that propels or moves people to act in this very audacious way on behalf of others or for others' sake. And we have seen Ruth do that. We're going to be introduced to character number 3 today, a guy named Boaz who does it, and Naomi engages it as well. And so we're in this most amazing story where we are seeing 3 characters just live in a very audacious way. They're bold, they're daring, they're fearless, they take chances, risking much along the way, but yet still living in this fearless, daring way. So pretty exciting stuff. So we're going to be in chapter 2. We're going to cover all of that text this morning, and there is a lot to cover, but really good stuff. And so the first 2 verses, here's where we're going to start, okay? First, couple things. So first, what we know is Ruth and Naomi are alone. Okay, they've come back to Bethlehem. No one has taken them in. No one has said, hey, we can help you out. They start the chapter alone. And by the way, I'm giving away if you haven't read the chapter, is they end the chapter alone. So even though we're going to read all this amazing stuff that occurs, and it's really cool stuff, as far as we know, they're still alone. Okay, with no long-term solution. And we'll share a quote on that at the end. We're going to be introduced to this guy named Boaz, and our narrator does a masterful job in the first verse here, letting us know some things. And then finally, yes, we see Ruth take initiative. And I think that's it. Oh, gleaning. Okay, there's going to be some gleaning too. So what is gleaning? So gleaning is this Old Testament concept. It's part of the law that if you were poor or you were a foreigner or an alien, you could follow behind the harvesters and pick up leftover grain. Okay, that would feed you, and sometimes they might even leave some for you because they knew, that you didn't have anything, and so you were allowed to follow along and pick up leftover grain to take home and eat, make bread, and so on. Well, all right, so let's take a look at the first 2 verses and see what our narrator tells us here. So Naomi has a relative, or had a relative of her husband's. Okay, so now we're kicked off to the first thing here is there's a relative that exists. Oh, okay, so as we're listening to this is good, right? This might be good for Naomi and Ruth because there's a relative that exists. We also learn that he's a worthy man. That would mean he's a man of social status as well as wealthy. Okay, so things are even getting better, right? So we're told right away here that he's a relative and he's a man of standing and wealth. Very nice. But it even gets better because he's of the clan of Elimelech. So he's in Naomi's husband's line. The narrator's seeing ding, ding, ding. Right, it's a good deal, possibly, for Naomi and Ruth. Now, the question we might be asking ourselves is, why hasn't he stepped forward yet? What's he doing? If he's a relative and he knows, and we're going to find out he knows, why hasn't he done anything? So, pretty intriguing. But he introduces us to him. We're going to find out later in the story that Naomi knows about Boaz. So intriguing what Naomi doesn't say in the beginning of the text as well. So verse 2. Ruth the Moabite. Don't we love it? We know she's a foreigner. Our narrator keeps telling us she's a foreigner. She says to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and this is where we got to love this gal, right? This gal is remarkable in her character. And so she's taking an if. She says, let me go. So essentially asking for permission. Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain. Okay, so let me go and glean after him in whose sight I shall find favor. Now, don't you think this is bold? It's not a matter of just saying, hey, let me go glean because we're hungry and no one seems to be dropping us off any food. But she's making a prediction here, essentially, is I'm going to go find a field, and the person who owns that field, they're going to find favor in me. Okay, so she's actually trying to write a prediction, and I love the boldness of this. I think so many times when we're off doing something, right, we shoot low. Just so if we fail, we stuck low. Ruth is shooting high. I'm going to go glean, I'm going to get some grain, and someone's going to find favor with me. Okay, so she's going big, essentially, as she gets ready to go provide for this family. And so what does Naomi say? Heck yeah, go, my daughter. Go do it. Go glean. Go find favor. Go find provision for us, essentially. All right, so which leaves us now with the next big section of text. There's a lot happening here, so I want to just kind of touch base. First of all, this idea of chance or luck. I think in the ESV, it's in verse 3. It says something like it happened to come, or by chance it might say. And so we read that, and we might read that in our context as well, it was luck, or it was by chance, or it was coincidence. An Old Testament reader would not read it that way. Okay, someone in this time period would say, there's no chance in this at all, it's God. Okay, so we want to read it like that. They're not suggesting this happened because of luck. Our narrator knows, right, how his audience is, and he knows they're reading that as God intervened. This is by Yahweh's hand, okay? So when we see maybe chance or luck, that's not happening. They wouldn't have read it that way. We meet Boaz. This is a righteous dude, if we can say that, right? He's godly, he's generous, he's inclusive. We'll explain that, right? This guy is quite the guy, and we just get introduced to him here, and we're going to even find out more about him next week. Ruth, we're going to learn about her identity a little bit, okay, and how she's looked at. We're going to see her continually be audacious. And then we're going to see, because of that audacity, we're going to see her included. Okay? And because of Boaz's godliness. Hesed, we're going to see this called out today. And then we're going to see our narrator once again use Old Testament words that would speak to his audience. Because this word that we read, reward, and we're like, reward, okay, big deal, reward. That reader might have heard that is the exact same word that was written when it said God rewarded Abraham. Okay, and so we see our narrator continually making Ruth very similar to Abraham, right? In the words that he uses as he's describing her. And then again, wings, big word, which says essentially God is your refuge. God is your covering. God will take care of you. Okay, and so when we hear these words, we want to see that stand out this morning. All right, so let's pick up in verse 3. So a lot of text to cover here, a lot of ground. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So she goes, she finds a field. She knows she understands the law, I guess. Maybe she's been told this. And so she starts to glean after the reapers, picking up loose grain. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Okay, so the reader in ancient times wouldn't have said, oh my gosh, that's so lucky. Reader in ancient times like, Yahweh's got a hand in this. God's got this, okay? We may be thinking it just happened, but God's got this. And so she happens to come to the field belonging to Boaz, which we know Boaz, right? We've been introduced to Boaz. Ruth hasn't been introduced to Boaz, but we have by our narrator, right? We know he's a relative. We know he's a man of standing who is of the clan of Elimelech. Okay, we already know this. Verse 4. And behold, kind of interesting here. It's like, look, or hey, or, in funny language, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Wouldn't you figure? Right, by chance she shows up in the field, and by chance Boaz happens to come down to the field today. Okay, not by chance. Again, the reader would not have seen it that way. God's involved. And he says to his reapers, may Yahweh be with you. And they answer back, may Yahweh bless you. So remarkable how we're introduced to this guy and the words that are put on his lips, right? He doesn't show up to the field, and the first thing the narrator records is, hey, maybe you all need to reap a little faster. Hey, maybe my guy that's the foreman, maybe you need to be working these people a little harder. No, this guy shows up, and what our narrator says about him is, man, he's a gracious guy, and he greets them in the name of Yahweh, and they greet him back in the name of Yahweh. So an introduction to this guy is, he's a righteous guy, right? This is a guy who cares about people. He cares about his servants. He cares about those who are working for him, right? And we know this isn't necessarily the case for a lot of folks. Verse 5. So Boaz says to his young man, or it might say servant in your text, who was in charge of the reapers, so essentially the foreman, the guy that's overseeing all the reapers. He says, whose young woman is this? Whose young woman? Right, in that culture, she's known by who her father is or who her husband is. Her identity is wrapped up in them, right? When someone new walks through the door, you don't walk up to someone and say, who, or what some young woman walks in, whose is she? Right, we say, who is she? Right, in the friend, when I ask someone a question about some new female that walks in, they don't say, well, she's the daughter of, or she's the wife of, right? Like, well, she does this, does that, does that. And by the way, you might know her husband, or you might know her dad, right? But he wants to know in this culture, essentially, where's her identity locked up? And her identity's locked up in her husband, and her identity's locked up in her father. And the servant who's in charge, or the young man in charge of the reapers, he says, well, she's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. So they know. So the scuttlebutt has been around, right? People are talking. People know about Naomi and Ruth. People know of their situation. But what? Has anybody stepped up yet? No. They're still alone. But people know. Very intriguing. And how is that different than today, right? Maybe we still like the scuttlebutt, and we know, but do we do? So he says, this is what she says to me. This audacious young gal. Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So the reapers are going along creating the sheaves, and they might actually drop some of the sheaves as they're going along. Now, that would be, the first line would be most likely the poor Israelite people. The aliens or the foreigners, they should be behind. She shows up on the scene, and she asks the foreman, can I be right in the midst of it? Can I be right up there, right? When they're creating the sheaves, when your reapers are going at it and they're dropping, fa-boom, I'm right in there. I want to be right there. She shouldn't be asking that question. She should be showing up in the field, hanging back. As far back as she can, saying, it's okay if I hang here. The foreman says, no, she didn't do that. Actually, she came and asked quite boldly for a spot. And so she came, he said, and she's continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So this young Moabite woman is bold, but apparently she's a hard worker. She's kept at it. She's kept at it, trying to collect enough for her and Naomi. So Boaz says to her, now listen, my daughter. Idea here with my daughter is that he's significantly older than her, which would seem to make sense, which would even make more sense even what we're going to see next week. So the idea is that he's significantly older. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women, who are the reapers, who would be reaping, and we're going to find that out. So keep close to them. So stay really close to the people that are actually doing the reaping, man, and you're going to be right in there. So he gives her permission almost immediately to stay right there. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them, because I've charged the young men not to touch you. So the field wouldn't be a place for a single female to be. Be very easily to be taken advantage of by the guys. So the women would have stayed in a group. They wouldn't have wandered off alone. It would not have been safe or good for them. Okay, so he's saying, stay with my young women. I've told the guys not to touch you, and especially a foreign woman, right? She's all alone. She doesn't have a group, a community, so to speak, at this point, right? And so he's saying to her, you stay with my young women. I've told the men not to bother you. They're not going to bother you. And then this next sentence, which I think we would probably read past, it's really an earth-shattering sentence. He says, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Now, who normally gathers the water for the men? The women. Right? The women would normally be doing the gathering of the water that would feed the men, that would drink, what do you call that? Would allow them to drink, have water available to them, right? So they'd be thirsty, right? For the men, Boaz and his foreman and so on. But this water actually has been collected by men. Do you think women would be drinking of water collected by the men? Not a chance. They'd have brought their own, or they'd have collected their own. But Boaz not only has said, stick with my young women right there as they're reaping, he said, you can actually go drink of that water over there that's been collected by the men. It's most likely for the men, but I'm going to let you, Ruth the Moabite, you foreigner, you refugee, whatever, you can have that. It's outrageous, right? What Boaz is already showing us is this guy is generous, this guy is godly, and he's already shown how he includes people in. Right? He's allowing this foreigner. He hasn't said this to the other poor Bethlehemite women that we know of, but he said it to Ruth. Outstanding, outstanding. A great lesson for us, I think. A great lesson for us, right? A lot of times we say we don't, but we like to rank people too. Like, okay, you're like you can come this close, maybe over here, He's taking this person that's totally on the margin, on the fringe, and he's saying, you come here and you drink the water that my guys collected essentially for them. You can have that. But he's not done being inclusive, by the way. But Boaz answers. Oh, she says to him, well, she falls on the ground in verse 10, on her face, bound to the ground, and she says, why have I found favor in your eyes? What did Ruth say at the beginning? I'm going to find favor. Right? I'm going to go find favor from someone. And so she's saying, hey, maybe this is happening. So why have I found favor from you that you would take notice of me since I'm what? I'm a foreigner. Why are you noticing me? You should just be like, yeah, keep her back there. Let her get enough. I mean, we know, just let her get enough. But he knows the story. Because why? Because people are talking. And Boaz knows as well. But let's make a point. Has anybody stepped up yet? No. No one's taken care of them. But here we go. So he answers her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. I know your story. What you've done for Naomi, have you stuck yourself to her and you've come back? I know this story. And how you left your father and mother and your native land. You see, we've talked about this a little bit, but this is a huge deal. In the ancient world, you would not leave your hometown and your family behind. Now, if your husband left, you would go with him, but you would not leave your family, right? You would stick, and normally you were marrying someone from the area too, so you would stick around where you were from. You wouldn't leave your father and mother, which it appears they're still alive, which maybe we've questioned, but they're there. You wouldn't leave them. It doesn't matter, even that situation really. You wouldn't leave mom and dad and land to attach yourself to another foreigner, regardless, and go. Right, that's tough for us to compute, right? Because we move all around. It's not a big deal to move, right? I mean, after high school, I hadn't been home since, right? I haven't moved back. I've been gone from my hometown since I've been 18, right? And so lived in multiple states. It's normal for us to move and ebb and flow and go. And so we read that and we're like, what's the big deal? But he's saying to her, this is a huge deal. I understand the sacrifice that you have made. And you came to a people that you did not know before. Right? You didn't just cross the street. You didn't just go to a town next to yours where you knew the culture. You went to a completely different group of people who you might even think wouldn't accept you. Right? So think about that. That's like us uprooting ourselves, attaching us to someone else, and going to another country where we're not even sure that people are going to accept us there. And people are doing that today around the world. I mean, the challenge of what she's doing is outrageous. And Boaz says, I recognize it. I recognize the sacrifice you've made, Ruth. So he says this, verse 12. He prays that Yahweh would repay you for what you have done. You're not even as far as we can tell, a Yahweh follower at this point, but he's asking that Yahweh would repay her for what she's done. And here's the word, with a full reward. This reward that he gave to Abraham. Be given to you by Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. You followed this woman back. You've left it all behind to be with her. Man, I trust Yahweh is going to repay you over and over, and I trust you are going to be refuge under his wings. Man, what a beautiful statement that he is making and essentially praying over her. And then she calls out in 13, the very thing she said she was going to make happen. that she hoped would happen, that whatever, she says, I have found favor. She cried out in verse 2, right? I'm going to glean and I'm going to find favor. By chance, and by chance, Boaz is there, this guy who knows the story and who's a relative. And he happens to be a godly, generous guy. And she says, I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly, chesed, to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. I don't belong to you. You have no responsibility for me at all. I'm not in your workforce or on your payroll, but you're giving me better position than everybody else. You're putting me right in the midst of it. You're letting me drink the water I shouldn't be drinking. Oh, do we think he's done yet? This guy is bringing her in this scene during harvest season. He is bringing this woman who's on the margin, and here's bringing her right into the center. It's unbelievable. He says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So this is going to be Boaz. This is going to be his foreman, maybe some of the reapers. We don't know, but this is the circle of folks, men. So she sat beside the reapers. So the reapers are there too, and he passed to her roasted grain. Who's serving her? Boaz. This guy is serving the foreigner. And she ate until she was satisfied, and because he kept serving her, she had some left over. Boaz knows Naomi's at home. He's not just giving it for her. We get the impression he's giving it for Naomi. He understands the situation. So when she rose to glean, Boaz instructs his young men, let her glean among the sheaves. Essentially, she's like a reaper behind. I mean, she's right in it. Okay? As they're gathering the sheaves, as they're putting it all together, he's saying, let her be right in the midst of it. Where are we at? And then he says, don't reproach her. Don't tell her she can't. And then also pull out some from the bundles. Don't just let her be among the sheaves. The bundle is the bigger amount. Pull out some and set them down for her. And leave it for her to glean. And do not rebuke her. Essentially, just give her a lot of grain. She's there not working for Boaz, by the way. The reapers are working for Boaz. They're doing their job. This gal's just trying to collect some food, and he's saying, give her an abundance of food. This guy's going above and beyond what is expected of him. It's an outrageous thing, and so we have to understand that someone reading this, I mean, we read it like, that's a nice dude. We have to understand that guy, if someone reading this in 500 or 600 BC is sitting there like, what the heck? What is he being so kind to this foreign Moabite woman who we don't really like them, right? And in that time period, they were instructed not even to marry them. So why is he doing that? Why is Boaz this generous and godly? And we see by the words that have been used, this guy is showing chesed as well. He's just as audacious as Ruth. Right? His workers could be like, what's going on, boss? What are you doing? The other poor women could be like, what's going on? I mean, how come the foreigner gets to leapfrog and get involved? But we're not done. We get to the last section. A few things. We still see Hesed. We see Naomi. Woo, Naomi's moving from bitterness to hope. This is good. But we end in the same spot we started. They're still alone. Let's take a look. So she gleaned in the field until evening. She stuck right there. As long as the reapers were there, she was there. And she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Okay, a lot of debate how much it is. Does it really matter? But it's a lot. Most scholars would say it's a week's worth. So in one day, she's got a week's worth of food. Not bad, eh? Not bad, especially if every day I get to collect a week's worth of food. Not bad. So she has about a week's worth of food, and she took it up and went into the city. And her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, so she brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. Okay, so she's given her what she's gleaned, and she's given her leftover food from lunch or dinner, whatever it was. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Like, this is outrageous. I expect you to come back maybe with a handful. You come back with a whole much more than a handful. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz. And then Naomi says something that you're sitting there wondering, why didn't Naomi say this ahead of time? But we saw God do a work, didn't we? And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness, whose chesed, has not forsaken the living or the dead. Right? The fact that he's caring for these people, these two women whose identity is dead, essentially. Saying, this is outrageous what he's doing for us. And then Naomi says also, hey, this man's a close relative of ours. He's one of our redeemers. Funny how God worked it out. Why didn't I tell you this? I'm not sure. And Ruth the Moabite, still the Moabite, she's still a foreigner. He said, besides, he said to me, and this is an interesting text here, and we don't really know what's going on. We shall keep close by young men until they have finished all my harvest. Now, that's not what he said, is it? He said, stay with my young women. But Ruth is audacious and bold and fearless and daring, and she's like, well, you know what? Maybe I want to be next to the young men because maybe there's more opportunity. So you get this idea that maybe she's bending this, maybe she didn't quite understand, right? We don't really know. But what we do know is Naomi corrects her. So Naomi says to Ruth, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. Because if you, Ruth the Moabite, are alone with young men in the field by yourself, unfortunately, not going to be good. High probability you're going to be assaulted. Not going to be good. So you stay with the young women. So what did she do in verse 23? She kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests. 7 to 8 weeks she would have been gleaning. And she lived with her mother-in-law. And so they end the story alone, which leaves us here. So they're alone with no future provision. The immediate problem solved, but the future is as bleak as when the chapter started. And so here's these two gals, right? Ruth takes initiative. Problem gets resolved, it seems, for the 7 to 8 weeks and probably a little longer because they were able to store up. So in the short term, they have a solution. And our guess is, because of how the narrator told us the story, that Ruth continues to see favor from Boaz. Right? Not just the first time, but multiple times she continues to see favor. And so they're taken care of in the short term. But do they have a permanent solution? No. Has anybody stepped up? No. Has Boaz stepped up? Well, he's providing for them in the moment, but at this point in the story, where the narrator ends us, no. Because what does he say? She lived with her mother-in-law. There's still no long-term solution. And I was thinking about this, and I'm going to share a quote here in a minute. I was thinking about this, is the story could end here. Really, the story could end right here and be like, oh my gosh, Ruth and Boaz, these people are amazing, right? The hesed they've shown, how they have loved, how they have helped. Maybe Boaz's help was only for a season, but the guy he's gone way out on a limb and how he's helping this foreign gal. This is a great story, right? We don't know where the end's going. There's no long-term solution, but wow. If I could only mimic one of them and how they've demonstrated hesed, that would be a big win for Tim, right? And I was thinking, like a lot of times, we look at problems that exist and we're like, that problem's too big, so we don't get involved. Or we look at a situation that someone has and we're like, ugh, I don't even know where that plays out, so we don't get involved. Ruth got involved when she had no idea how it was going to play out. Boaz got involved when he had no idea how it was going to play out. Neither of them have solved a long-term problem, but they got involved when the moment was given. Right? And that really speaks to me because I think there's seasons where God might have me be involved on behalf of another person, for the sake of another person for one day. But he gave me the opportunity to be involved. Or he may say, Tim, I know you're looking at this problem here of whatever this problem might be for one person or a group of people, and I know you don't see how you could do anything to cause a dent, but I want you to be involved. Am I willing to step in and show chesed even in that moment when I see zero opportunity or option or any way I could solve the problem? But God says, dive in with both feet. Maybe for a week, maybe for a month, maybe for a year, maybe for the rest of your life. And maybe you feel like you fret and fret and fret because you never solve the big problem. But maybe you're changing lives along the way. And then I saw this quote. This guy's an entrepreneur. He's a He's a writer. Look him up. Really intriguing guy. But I love this quote. It said, your mind shines brightest when you enlighten others. Your heart shines brightest when you encourage others. Your soul shines brightest when you elevate others. And your life shines brightest when you empower others. Isn't that beautiful? There's moments I get to be a part of someone's life where I get to enlighten. There's moments where I get to encourage. There's moments where I get to elevate. There's moments when I get to empower. And there's moments where I get to do all of them. But how that affects me is amazing, right? That shows me. That is a part of my character. That's a part of what God is doing in me. That's a part of who I am when I'm engaged in enlightening and elevating and empowering and encouraging. And sure, I might not be able to solve the problem. Sure, I might not have the big fix, but that is never and should never be an excuse for not being involved where God wants us to be involved. Right? But we make excuses and we miss out opportunities to elevate or encourage or empower. But how beautiful it is when we get to do that. Church, I want to encourage us this morning in that. It's a crazy story, right? It's crazy. Boaz, he's crazy. Ruth, she's crazy. The scheme we're going to read next week that Naomi's hatching, unbelievable. These people are audacious. They're living life on the edge. At any moment, anything could go wrong and mess every single one of them up, even leading to death. But these people are like, what the heck? We're going to live life on the edge. And they are. Man, I'm motivated by that. I'm motivated by the fact that I can step in alongside of others to be there when I need to be there. And God has given us this amazing example of this foreigner to teach us how to do that. So Lucas and Bill are going to come back up. This is a great song, man. This is a great song, Scandal of Grace. It's a scandal. This story is a scandal. What Naomi's about to propose is a scandal. And it could have ended up in a horrible way. But man, church, don't miss opportunities to be there. Don't miss opportunities that God gives us daily to jump into something that might blow us away, to say, oh my gosh. But to be there for the moments God gives us to be there. To enlighten, to encourage, to elevate, or to empower. Let's pray. Lord God, we love you. Man, sometimes, Lord, I feel so helpless for the things you ask of me, for the places you put me, for the people you want me to love. But Lord, I don't want to miss opportunities. It's so easy to be on the other side of these words. It's so easy to be the guy that condemns or judges or doesn't show up or makes excuses or tells someone how they should live. But just to show up, to elevate someone, to encourage them or to empower them. Just think of how Ruth is doing that for Naomi. I think about how Boaz is doing that for Naomi and Ruth. Lord, use us mightily to impact our community and the world for you. In Jesus' name.